Emily Riedel just pulled off the biggest win in Bering Sea history, a $45 million gold discovery that's left even veteran miners stunned. After a season of engine failures, financial losses, and brutal storms, she found what no one else could: a hidden trench packed with gold dense enough to overload her dredge. The site matches the coordinates of her late father's abandoned claim, one he warned her never to touch. But Emily didn't back down. She went in, broke through the silt, and uncovered a gold vein no miner in Nome has ever seen. This is how her toughest season turned into the richest payoff in gold rush history. Before we dive into this story of risk, ruin, and one of the wildest gold finds in Bering Sea history, make sure you hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the moment Emily Riedel turns everything she's ever worked for into a $45 million comeback. The Bering Sea has never been kind to Emily Riedel. This season, it's been downright brutal. Engines failed, pumps froze, promises fell apart faster than the ice shelf breaking around Nome. For weeks, she'd been burning through fuel and patience with nothing to show for it. The crew could feel it, that quiet, bitter end-of-season dread, when even the toughest miners start talking about heading home. Emily was ready to call it. She'd already packed half the gear when an old man walked down the dock, a retired dredger who'd spent the 90s chasing gold before GPS made it easy. He carried a water-stained map folded into quarters, edges frayed from years of salt and wind. Without saying a word, he pointed to a hand-drawn X near the bottom edge of the chart. Just beside it, one word: Riedel. Emily frowned. She'd never worked that far out. The coordinates pointed toward a trench, one that didn't exist on any of her navigation maps. The old man said a storm had wiped it clean decades ago, swallowing 2 dredges and a fortune in machinery. "Nobody went back," he muttered, "but I always wondered what it buried." Then he handed her the map, turned, and disappeared down the dock. For Emily, it wasn't curiosity. It was instinct. Something about that mark, that name, felt personal. It was her one last shot to salvage a season that had already bled her dry. One final gamble before winter sealed the Bering Sea for good. Within a week, Emily made the call that stunned everyone in Nome. She was mortgaging her dredge, her entire livelihood, for a short expedition into that trench. Every investor she'd ever had told her she was out of her mind. Half her crew refused to come back on board, but the half that stayed knew one thing: when Emily locked onto something, she didn't stop. She brought in a new hire for this run, a young sonar tech named Nate. Fresh out of Alaska Pacific University, barely 25, but already obsessed with what he called anomalous seafloor structures. Nate's first scan of the coordinates sent a ripple through the room. He looked up and said quietly, "That's not a normal seabed. Something down there's man-made." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. In Nome, there's a fine line between discovery and disaster. Every day they waited, the ice crept closer to shore. Every storm risked trapping them in place. But Emily didn't care. She was all in. "If I'm going down," she said, "I'm going down mining." When they finally reached the coordinates, the water was thick with silt, visibility barely a foot. They dropped the camera rigs over the side, the feed flickering between gray static and ghostly shadows. For hours, nothing. Just mud, darkness, and silence. Then, out of nowhere, the sonar spiked. A dense cluster buried under 20 feet of sand, metal strong enough to bounce a full signal. At first, they thought it was wreckage from one of those old 90s dredges. But when the divers hit bottom and started clearing away debris, what they found didn't look like old equipment. It looked older, heavier, something fused into the seabed itself. Nate's instruments started screaming. The density readings were off the charts, nearly pure metal. Emily leaned over the monitor, her eyes narrowing. She'd seen hundreds of sonar spikes before, but this one? It looked alive. Real gold doesn't show up that dense unless it's layered, unless it's sitting in pockets, trapped in something untouched. They brought up the first bucket of sediment and ran it through the sluice. Within seconds, the mats started catching flakes. Fine gold, clean and rich. Then more. Then chunks. The table went silent. The pump still roared, but everyone just stared at the shimmer building in the riffles. Nate looked over at Emily, grinning through disbelief. "You seeing this?" Emily didn't answer. She just stood there, hands gripping the rail, eyes locked on that endless stream of color sliding through the water. After weeks of breakdowns, sleepless nights, and near bankruptcy, she finally saw it. Proof. Something was buried down there worth risking everything for. And for the first time all season, she turned to her crew and said quietly, "We're staying." By dawn, the trench was already pulling them in deeper than they'd planned. What began as a gamble was turning into fixation. Visibility dropped to nothing, the divers working mostly by touch. The suction hose kept clogging with twisted scrap and chain links that shouldn't have been buried that deep. Every few minutes, the comms crackled with strain and exhaustion, but no one stopped. Then one of the divers surfaced, coughing through his regulator, clutching something small and heavy in his glove. When Emily pried it open, she saw the green shimmer of corrosion over brass. The letters were barely legible, but she could still make them out. ER01. For a second, she didn't breathe. That was her father's mark. The same stamp he'd used on his first claim tags decades ago, long before she ever set foot on a dredge. Everyone on deck went quiet. It wasn't just some coincidence. Her dad had worked this trench before and never told anyone. In her head she heard him, that same old warning from her childhood. Some things in the sea should stay lost. He hadn't been talking about folklore. He'd been talking about this place. Still, she couldn't stop. They went back under, pulling more debris from the seabed. Each load came up heavier than the last, until the dredge strained against its own anchors. The sediment coming through the hose glittered faintly in the floodlights, not from normal flakes, but from something finer, almost like powdered glass. When the crew ran it through the sluice, the mats caught thin ribbons of gold stacked in layers. It didn't look natural. It looked manufactured, like gold that had once been melted and reshaped, then shattered back into dust. Nate spent hours hunched over the sonar feed, running calibration after calibration. What he saw made no geological sense. Multiple dense clusters below the surface, arranged in straight lines. "Pockets don't form like that," he said. "It's too precise." Emily thought maybe it was runoff from an old industrial line, but the divers kept pulling up things that didn't fit that theory. One of them surfaced, holding a lump that looked like coral, except it rang when it hit the deck. They chipped away at it and revealed what could only be a gold bar, fused solid with stone. The markings were gone, worn off by time, but the weight didn't lie. By now, the trench had stopped feeling like a gold claim and started feeling like a vault. Every scoop of silt seemed to lead to something deeper, more deliberate. The readings grew stronger the farther they went, and the machine's graphs turned into blocky patterns instead of random scatter. Emily didn't want to say it out loud, but she knew they'd uncovered something that wasn't meant to be disturbed. Then the weather turned. Out of nowhere, a gale ripped across the sea, hammering their small operation like it wanted to erase them. The wind screamed through the rigging and tossed nearby boats until half of them broke anchor and drifted into the darkness. Nate yelled over the radio that they needed to shut everything down before the surge capsized them, but Emily refused. "We've come too far to pull out now," she shouted back. "We hold." The dredge pitched hard as waves slammed its sides. The suction line buckled. Pumps strained against intake pressure until one exploded, sending water spraying across the deck. A diver still in the water barely made it back before the cable snapped. The wash plant trembled under the storm, but it kept running, every tray and mat churning in violent rhythm. By midnight, the sea looked like a field of black glass, wind slicing the spray sideways. Most captains would have cut power and prayed, but Emily stood by the sluice, watching the mats as if the storm didn't exist. Hours passed before the wind finally broke. Dawn came pale and silent, coating the deck with frost. When the crew checked the traps, they froze. The mats were jammed solid with gold, thick, heavy, compacted in clumps bigger than anyone had ever pulled from that region. They spread it out on the table, counting the ounces until the numbers didn't make sense anymore. It was more than her last 3 seasons combined, all from one night of chaos. Emily just stared at it, exhausted, hair plastered to her face, eyes bloodshot from no sleep. "If that was surface wash," she said quietly, "then we're sitting on something unreal." The trench had nearly broken them, the storm, the risk, the machines, but it had also answered the question that had haunted her since the first sonar ping. Whatever her father had found out here, whatever he'd buried in silence, it was still waiting below them. And Emily wasn't going anywhere until she pulled every last ounce from the deep. The storm outside finally eased, but inside her head, it was still roaring. The gold they'd found didn't make sense. Too dense, too pure, too deliberate. While the crew slept, she went below deck, drawn by a thought she'd tried to ignore all season. In a weathered trunk under her bunk sat her father's old logbooks, the ones she swore she'd never open. Dozens of them, smelling of diesel and salt, pages filled with coordinates, dredge depths, and warnings written like prayers. She flipped through them until a torn, half-soaked page slipped free from behind an old invoice and froze. Shelf sealed under fractured ice. Vein continuous, deeper than sonar reads. The handwriting was unmistakable. Her father had been here on this exact site, mapping what he called a gold shelf. He'd found it, then buried every trace of it. The last line on the page stopped her cold. Not meant to be taken. Emily stared at it for a long time, the words blurring under the cabin light. She could almost hear him, that low, warning tone he used when something wasn't right. But she couldn't turn back. This was her find now. His map had led her here, and she wasn't about to let ghosts dictate her next move. She folded the page, tucked it into her jacket pocket, and went topside. The order came out like a command she'd been holding in for years. Full-scale dive. We're going all the way down. By mid-morning, the dredge was alive again. The suction lines screamed as they bit through silt, the whole rig shuddering from the torque. Beneath the trench floor, the divers broke through a layer harder than anything they'd hit before. Compacted clay and quartz, fused together like a shell. When they cracked it open, the hose went rigid. The suction slowed to a crawl, choked by heavy material. The first load hit the deck with a thud. Nate brushed away the mud, and what stared back wasn't gravel. It was gold. Thick nodules, some the size of fists, solid and gleaming even through grime. They were so heavy they bent the sorting tray under their weight. The scales started flashing error codes. The sensors couldn't even process how dense it was. Emily didn't speak. She just leaned over the sluice as the next bucket came through, then another, the entire wash plant humming with color. No one said a word until the deckhand finally broke the silence. "That's more than we can process," he muttered. Emily just shook her head, eyes still on the flow. "Don't stop," she said quietly. "Not until it's empty." Hour after hour, the dredge tore deeper into the trench, pulling up more gold than anyone could count. It piled in buckets, stacked on tables, filling pans that couldn't even hold the weight. Nate's sonar feed flickered with new readings. More pockets below, scattered in lines that seemed carved, not natural. "It's like it's layered intentionally," he whispered. Emily didn't answer. She didn't have to. Somewhere inside, she already knew her father had found the same thing. Maybe he'd just been too afraid to take it all. By nightfall, exhaustion was setting in, But Emily kept the team running. The sea had gone eerily calm, a flat mirror under the dark sky, like it was waiting for something. Then, around midnight, a low pop echoed through the deck, a sound every miner dreads. One of the hydraulic lines burst, spraying oil across the walkway. The suction stalled, pressure gauges spiked, alarms lit up across the console. The dredge tilted hard to port as water rushed in through a cracked seal. The crew scrambled, shutting valves, securing cables, fighting to keep the rig from slipping under. Emily grabbed the radio, shouting for the divers to surface. It took them 3 hours just to stabilize the system. Pumps screamed under load, the backup generator nearly blew, and still she refused to shut it down. Her satellite phone buzzed through the chaos. Her investors calling from Anchorage. They'd been tracking her data feeds, watching the power surges, and now they wanted answers. "You're running unauthorized dives past funding limits," one of them barked. "You shut down now, or we pull the plug on everything." Emily wiped the salt from her face, staring out at the black water. Her voice was steady, quiet, like she'd already decided. "You'll get your money when I hit bottom." She ended the call without waiting for a response. By the time the deck lights flickered back on, the crew was drained, their faces gray from cold and adrenaline. Nate stayed at his station, scanning the sonar again, hoping to find something that made the night worth it. The screen was glitching, static crawling across the grid, but beneath it a new signal appeared. Dense, round, massive. He recalibrated twice to be sure. The readings showed a single pocket nearly twice the size of the last one, sitting deeper than any of their current digs had reached. He turned to Emily, the color returning to his face. "It's still down there," he said, "bigger than anything we've hit so far." Emily stared at the feed, the pulsing echo bouncing off the seabed like a heartbeat. The deck was a wreck, half their systems fried, the dredge barely holding together. But that signal was still there. Heavy, solid, promising enough gold to rewrite everything they thought they knew about the Bering Sea. She didn't smile. She didn't say a word. She just placed her hand on the rail, eyes fixed on that last sonar pulse fading on the monitor, and gave a single nod. The crew knew what it meant. As the final ping dissolved into static, the deck lights dimmed and the dive alarms sounded. Within minutes, the crew was back in their suits, lowering into black water thick with silt. The hum of the dredge faded above them, replaced by the hollow rush of bubbles and the muted thud of their own heartbeats. The trench wall glinted faintly, as if light was trapped beneath the layers. Nate's voice cracked through the comms. Density readings were spiking off the charts. When the first chunk surfaced, it was unlike anything they'd ever seen. Compacted rock, shot through with visible gold. They chipped away carefully and realized the entire formation was metallic. Not a scatter of nuggets, but a vein, solid, fused into the seabed. The crew works in silence, adrenaline humming through the comms. Every bucket that surfaces strains the winch, the lines creaking like they're about to snap. Emily calls for slow lifts, steady pace. The pumps choke from the weight, nearly stalling the dredge. What comes up next sends everyone scrambling. Slabs of gold-rich material, each one heavier than a man could lift. Nate's voice shakes as he reads the tonnage. "That's not possible." Emily doesn't respond. She just watches the gold roll down the sluice, collecting in heavy clusters. It isn't dust. It's not nuggets. It's wealth in its purest form, layered through stone. Hours stretch into the night. The weather shifts again, clouds thickening, winds building, the dredge rocking violently. But they keep going. They can't stop now. Emily knows the pressure's too much, that one wrong move could sink them, but she pushes harder. Each load is heavier, each reading stronger. Finally, the dredge groans under the strain. Alarms screaming as ballast tanks shift. They dump the last bucket and watch in awe as the sluice clogs entirely with coarse, gleaming gold. It's so dense the mats can't even catch it all. Emily steps back, staring at what they've done. "That's it," she says quietly. "We hit the pocket." When they finally return to shore, the entire port gathers to see the haul. Piles of concentrate glitter in the cold light, every grain proof of what they'd pulled from the trench. The smelter fires run through the night, melting the raw material into bars one after another. By dawn, the tally is in: 1,423 pounds of pure gold. Nearly $45 million in value. The room goes silent as the final number is read out. Cameras catch Emily, dropping her head into her hands, shoulders shaking. The weight of 10 brutal seasons collapsing into that single moment. She'd done it, against every failure, every storm, every voice that told her she couldn't. News spreads instantly. Record-breaking season. Historic yield. The first female captain in Nome to single-handedly pull a $45 million cleanout. Discovery crews flood the docks, trying to film every second of it, but Emily keeps her answers short. She names the site the Riedel Shelf, after her father, and quietly refuses to disclose the coordinates. Only the crew knows where it lies. They celebrate on the pier that night, not with champagne, but coffee and silence. The kind that only comes when you realize you've actually done the impossible. Weeks later, with the sea turning to slush again and the season ending, Emily returns to the spot one last time. The trench is already closing, the ice sealing back over what they opened. She walks along the deck of the dredge, tracing her hand over the scarred metal. Every dent, every patch, every line a reminder of what they risked. Nate hands her a small gold fragment, one of the first they pulled from the shelf. It's fused with coral and rust, still rough, untouched. She tucks it into her jacket. "Dad was right," she murmurs. "The sea doesn't give up gold easy." But it did this time, and it gave her more than gold. It gave her his legacy, his unfinished story finally complete. She stands at the bow, watching the fog settle across the empty horizon. The crew is already packing up, ready to head south before the ice traps them in. For once, no one's arguing, no one's broke, no one's wondering if they'll make it through the winter. They've done enough. As the last of the dredge equipment is hauled in, Emily looks over the calm, silent water. Somewhere down there lies what's left of the Riedel Shelf, a vein of gold that rewrote Bering Sea history and proved once and for all that she was more than the opera singer who tried mining. She was the one who found what everyone else missed. She smiles faintly, pulls her hood up against the wind and whispers, "We found it." And with that, she walks off the deck, the gold gleaming faintly in her pocket, leaving behind a chapter that no one, not Nome, not Discovery, not the Bering Sea itself, will ever forget.